From Atlanta, Georgia, welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, a podcast for women on leadership and life skills with Rhea Story. Rhea shares powerful life and leadership principles, helping you maximize your potential and become the woman God created you to be.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode on kind of continuing from last week where I talked a little bit about and introduced the concept of the ladder of influence. Today, I wanted to drill down into 3 leadership truths that we all need to know. And again, this is one of the things I thought about as I worked on coming up with this framework for the book. And the ladder of influence is a framework, just a simple framework, but powerful framework that help you realize the practical steps that you can take to increase your influence with people around you. Friends and family and coworkers and your boss and team members and children and even spouses, right? But 3 truths that I wanted to drill down into today about leadership and influence. Number 1, you can't change anyone except yourself. And there's so much frustration in our lives created around when we try to fix, correct, or improve others. And ultimately, you can't change, fix, or correct others or make other people do anything. Believe me, I've tried. At the end of the day, you can't change anyone except yourself. And that's not easy to do. But most of the time, you can increase your influence with someone, but you have to stop blaming them and start working on what you can change yourself. Right? But I've said this before, the reason we blame other people is that it's easy. Because if it's their fault, then I don't have to do anything to fix it. It's their fault. So we blame other people because there is only one other alternative. And the moment we stop blaming others is the moment we accept responsibility for ourselves. Now, as humans, as people, we naturally like to externalize blame. We like to externalize responsibility, but it doesn't serve us well. And I've talked on many, many times in previous podcast episodes, the greatest limiting belief is a victim mindset because playing a victim will not take you forward in life. So avoid the victim mindset. You cannot change much of what happens in life. You cannot control much of what happens in life. But you always have the freedom and the power and the ability to change yourself. So stop focusing on fixing or controlling other people. Now, when you do, number one, your stress level is going to go way down because you are absolutely 100% saying, you know what, I cannot control whatever it is or whoever it is. I'm going to release the need to feel like I can control that or dictate that or determine that. And when I do, I'm going to quit worrying about it. And that means I'm going to quit stressing about it. And the best example I can think of is like the weather. We cannot control the weather. We know we cannot control the weather. And so, at best, all we can do is continuously check the forecast for the weather. But at the end of the day, we cannot change the weather. So, what you can control, however, is if you pack the umbrella or the rain jacket or the warm coat to deal with the weather that comes your way. So, what you can do, be proactive about looking ahead. And number 2, proactive about preparing for what's ahead. And it's the same way with our circumstances and our situations in our personal and professional lives. You can be proactive about looking ahead and proactive about preparing for what's ahead, but you cannot control what's ahead, right? The best thing you can do is stop worrying about it and start preparing for it. Start equipping yourself for it. And that will reduce much of the stress and anxiety in life. You cannot change anyone except yourself. Quit worrying about fixing anyone except yourself. Number 2, there are going to be people you cannot influence. I have been asked this question over and over again. People are like, are there really just some people that you cannot influence? Yes, there are some people you simply cannot increase your influence with because they don't share your values. Because they don't share your values. However, that's a very small percentage of the population. There are a few people who simply aren't interested in change or growth, and they don't value change or growth. They don't value things getting better. And so, if you're a positive person, a positive valued person, you are not going to have shared mutual values with someone who doesn't share your values. And so, it's going to be almost impossible to increase your influence with them. Now, you can build the relationship with them, but most of the time, you're not going to be able to influence them at a very high level because they don't have shared values. So you're always going to be, there's always going to be some friction, right? Because you're in motion, you're forward facing, growing, moving, and they are not. And so there will be some friction there because it's not like the two of you are growing even unequally or even a little bit. There is, if somebody is just absolutely not interested in growth or getting better or improving, they're going to be stagnant or going backwards, and you're going to be going forwards. And that friction is going to cause some problems sooner or later. But just know that is a leadership truth, is that there are people you cannot influence. It's a very small percent of people. But you know what? Don't worry about them. Don't hate them. Don't blame them. Don't fight them. They are just going in a different direction in life, and it's their life. They get to choose which direction they go in. What you have to do is realize that you can stay positive, stay true to your course, and keep climbing your ladder. And you might be surprised that one day you've gained influence simply because you refused to give up on doing the right thing. Sometimes you're able to increase your influence just by doing the right thing long enough, and that sooner or later they see that it's authentic. You might actually gain influence with someone over time just because you are able to demonstrate that it's real, it's lasting, and it's authentic. But there are a tiny fraction of people who you cannot change and you cannot influence. And then number three, leadership truth, influence truth. You cannot stop climbing because you're going to be at different places relative to influence with other people at different times in different relationships. So you may have one relationship that you've climbed to a high degree of influence, and then you meet someone new and you have to start all over again with increasing your influence with that person, right? Because it's a different person, it's a different relationship. And I shared with you last week there are 5 steps on the ladder of influence, and you will find yourself striving to climb to different levels with different people, even at different times. And just like a real ladder, you cannot skip steps, right? You have to use the step below to start climbing to the next one above. But even if you get to the top fifth and final step on the ladder of influence, you're not going to stop climbing because you're still at some level working on different relationships and trying to increase your influence in those different relationships. Even in long term relationships, you might have achieved a certain level of influence, but you cannot forget that your influence is built from the ground up, and you don't ever get to stop worrying about that bottom step, controlling yourself, control of self. Because that's a foundational level. It'd be like trying to climb up to the third or fourth steps on a ladder, and then someone, you knock the bottom step out, and what's going to happen? Well, the rest of the ladder is going to fall because that bottom step is supporting all of the other steps above it. So you never stop climbing in some sense because relationships are are there, and they are built on that trust, but that begins with being able to control yourself in the moment, right? Controlling that inner 2-year-old so that when your emotions are blowing up and blowing over, you are able to control those and say the emotions are there. But it's Andy Stanley who reminds us our feelings can be terrible leaders. Our feelings can be terrible leaders. Right? We've all had that experience of saying or doing something in the emotion of the moment and later thought, oh, should not have said that. Shouldn't have done that. Right? I know I'm not the only one. And that's okay. I was teaching a class just the other day, and the point I shared with the audience that I was teaching, I was like, don't beat yourselves up when you make a mistake. Don't beat yourself up when you make a mistake. Learn the lesson and then apply that forward, right? Because we are going to have times when we lose that control of self. Usually, it's in a situation where there is a lot of emotion for ourselves, or maybe that there's a lot at stake, or sometimes you just have a stressful day and you lose that, right? That ability to pause and choose your right response in the situation. But don't beat yourself up when you slip, but get right back on track, right? I always say give yourself some grace, but don't miss twice. Give yourself some grace and then get right back on it, right? If you find yourself falling off the ladder because you slipped on control of self, get right back up and start climbing again. It's only failure if you quit. It's only failure if you quit, if you give up. And that's the moment that it becomes failure. So, you know, thinking about that, those are three just fundamental truths that are absolutely principles when it comes to influencing people. Because a lot of times, there again, we try to fix other people, we try to correct other people when we're not happy with what someone else is saying or doing. We try to blame them, and that just simply stresses us out because we cannot fix them. And that's going to drive your stress hormones out the roof. That's going to drive your anxiety levels up. That's going to drive your stress up. You quit worrying about the things you and people you cannot control, and quit worrying about the ones that you cannot influence, and quit thinking you're going to arrive one day and you'll stop climbing, because you won't. At the end of the day, those are three fundamental principles of influencing other people. Short and simple and yet powerful, right? Because that's the way the most powerful things in life are simple. Simple to understand, not necessarily easy to apply, right? It's one of those things, it says easy and it does hard. But at the end of the day, you absolutely can do it. And there again, when you find that you do more of it, you find that it's easier to continue to do more of it. Until next time. I hope you've enjoyed this short podcast episode, which is an excerpt from my new book, The Ladder of Influence, releasing March of 2023. You can go ahead and pre-order your signed copies now. They are available for pre-order by going to theladderofinfluence.com, and near the bottom of the screen, you'll see a button to pre-order your signed copies. See you next time.